This wasn't just a war of trenches, cannons, or barbed wire. World War I was in truth a war of money. It was fought in gold reserves, bond markets, central banks, and in the secret offices of bankers who never once set foot on the battlefield. Soldiers shed blood, but bankers and governments only did the math. Who profited, who sank into debt, and it was all recorded. And every move they made back then didn't just decide the outcome of the war. It shaped the financial system that still affects us today. If you think war is only about politics and soldiers, think again. Because World War I taught us one thing. Money is a weapon, and one of the deadliest ever made. In 1914, Europe was a powder keg. Nations didn't trust each other. Everyone was suspicious of everyone else. But beneath all the talk of honor, empire, and glory, there was a harsher truth. To wage a modern war, you needed an impossible amount of money. And here's the plain fact. When a leader declares war, they automatically put their people into debt. With every soldier sent to the front, millions more carried the economic burden on their backs. At first, governments thought it would be short. They'll be home by Christmas, they said. They believed they could fund it with gold, a bit of borrowing and public donations. But that dream collapsed fast. The war was burning through money like a furnace. By the summer of 1914, Europe was still on the gold standard. Every paper note was backed by a specific amount of gold. That gave money credibility, but it also tied governments' hands. Gold was limited. You couldn't just print endlessly. If you did, trust, and therefore everything, would collapse. But when the costs exploded, that system fell apart. One by one, nations abandoned the gold standard. To put it simply, money became just a promise. No longer backed by gold, but backed by the word of the state. And that moment became one of history's great turning points. Because from then on, money and reality no longer had to match. Governments could now print, borrow, and create credit freely. And once they tasted that power, they never went back. Germany was cut off from global markets. The British Navy's blockade made foreign financing impossible. The only option was domestic borrowing. They launched massive war bond campaigns for the fatherland. Posters showed heroic soldiers. Ads promised, your money will be repaid after victory. The result? They raised 100 billion marks from the public. But the entire system was built on hope. And when the war was lost, those bonds became worthless overnight. Millions lost their savings. That anger would later fuel extremism. Britain was luckier. London was already the world's financial capital. The pound was trusted, and British bankers had global ties. At first, they managed with short-term debt, but soon turned to America. The US was neutral at the time, but its bankers saw the opportunity. Firms like JP Morgan funneled billions in loans to Britain and France. By the time the US officially entered the war in 1917, it had already been its main financier for years. It wasn't charity, it was power. That war turned America from a debtor nation into the world's largest creditor. The so-called American century began right there. Not with weapons, with balance sheets. France was in trouble too. It was already carrying the burden of earlier wars. The government pushed citizens to buy bonds, but most of the real money still came from the US. That made France financially dependent on America. Russia, meanwhile, collapsed completely. Its economy was weak, its system fragile. War expenses skyrocketed as confidence in the ruble vanished. By 1917, the economy had disintegrated, and the empire fell with it. The revolution was lit not only by ideology, but by poverty. When the war ended, the world was filled not only with ruined cities, but with ruined balance sheets. The Allies had spent $140 billion, the Central Powers, $60 billion. Numbers the world had never seen before. And those numbers didn't just represent debt. They marked the end of the old financial order. The gold standard was gone. Inflation exploded. In Germany, a single loaf of bread cost billions of marks. Savers were destroyed, but the wealthy survived. The lesson was clear. In a financial war, the little guy always loses first. And now let's bring it to today. World War I was the moment governments learned they could detach money from reality and still make the system work. No gold, no problem. Print money, issue debt, sell bonds, and problem solved. That playbook hasn't changed since. Every major crisis, from the Great Depression to 2008, echoes that same era. Back then, government said it's temporary. Today, they still say the same, and people still believe them, until their money is worth nothing. When the war ended, the US was the richest nation on earth, and Europe was drowning in debt. Britain owed America $4 billion, France owed $3 billion. Wall Street replaced London as the center of global finance. Power had shifted permanently to America, but it didn't end there. Because every war financed by debt leads to another, the War of Repayment. Britain and France, desperate to repay their citizens, demanded reparations from Germany, 132 billion gold marks, an impossible sum. Unable to pay, Germany printed money. Its economy collapsed, and by 1923, hyperinflation had consumed everything. People carried wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy bread. In 1925, Britain tried to restore the glory days by reattaching the pound to gold. The result? A crashed economy, soaring unemployment, and public misery. Meanwhile, the US was lending money to Europe, so Germany could pay reparations, so France and Britain could use that money to repay America. A perfect circle. Money wasn't really being created, just passed around. When the Great Depression hit in 1929, the system collapsed completely. That's why World War I isn't just a chapter in military history. It's a turning point in economic history. It proved that governments could keep the system alive by indebting their citizens, printing money, and manipulating reality. And that formula still works today. When central banks say inflation is temporary, or governments say, we just need to raise the debt ceiling a bit. Remember 1914. The gold standard wasn't abandoned by accident. It was abandoned out of desperation. And the playbook born from that desperation is still being used right now. Real wealth isn't the numbers you see on a screen. Real wealth is resilience, knowledge, and awareness, seeing through the illusions of the system. Because throughout history, that's been the only path to true freedom. And finally, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. The financial rule book written in 1914 is still in play. The cover may have changed, but the outcome hasn't. The powerful protect themselves, and those who don't understand the game pay the price. So never forget this. Money isn't real just because it's printed, and the system isn't safe just because they say so. The truth is always hidden in the balance sheets. And history, yes, history never lies. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe, because all the answers are in history. I'll show you where to look.